good evening, and here's hoping you've had a pleasant Monday. As always, on a day and time as this, we discuss issues to drive Zimbabwe forward. I am Linda Muriro. Now, over the past months, we ran a number of discussions in a build up to the 44th Southern African Development Community SADC Ordinary Summit of Heads of State and Government. Week in and week out, we brought in different experts to dissect issues around Zimbabwe's hosting of the summit, what it meant for Zimbabwe, the region, and its citizenry. You called in, expressed your views, concerns, aspirations, and expectations. Finally, the summit came. Zimbabwe hosted the summit over the weekend, and the gathering was one of the best attended by heads of state and government. We had 13 heads of state coming to the SADC Summit that was held in Zimbabwe. And as far as attendance is concerned by heads of state, the least attended summit was in South Africa in 2017, where just 9 out of the 16 heads of state and government attended. Now, the Harare Summit ran under the theme Promoting Innovation to Unlock Opportunities for Sustained Economic Growth and Development Towards an Industrialized SADC. The event saw President Mnangagwa taking over the region's chairmanship badge from outgoing chair João Manuel Lourenço of Angola to mark the beginning of his reign amid wild cheers from delegates at the summit. In his acceptance speech, the president implored member states to reap maximum value from the region's natural resources, enhance modernization by embracing innovation, science, and technology to achieve a high quality of life for citizens of the 16-member bloc. The region made several resolutions during their meeting, which include calling for the removal of sanctions on Zimbabwe, implementing the tripartite free trade area agreement, and protecting, among other things, people with albinism. Tonight we discuss this and more. Stay with us.
This is Muriro on Monday on Star FM. Muriro on Monday. Brace yourself, it's a hard hat area.
And I'm joined in studio by infrastructure development expert Masimba Marangwanda, economist Dr. Nyasha Kaseke, political analyst Dr. Leopold Chakanyuka, and Abigail Mpambi. Lady and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us, Linda.
All right, and as always, we want to hear from you, our listener. Do be part of this discussion via our studio WhatsApp number 0772162651, and you can also link up with me via social media. I am at Linda Muriro across all platforms, and I will be opening the phone lines during the course of the show. Now, I will begin with you, Masimba, your overall assessment of the just ended SADC Summit.
My assessment, the summit went very well. I appreciate from an infrastructure point, there was a lot of frustration for people when we were talking about the roads being done and the infrastructure towards the summit, but I'm sure people are now happy seeing what has been done, because this is something that is going to last long. It wasn't meant specifically for the summit, but it will also continue. But it went well, from my personal opinion. Discussions were had. I had an opportunity to sit on a panel speaking at the SADC industrialization, where we had some frank discussions with policymakers to say, these conversations have been happening for a while, and I think it's time for us to start being honest and truthful that if we want to have the region move forward to be as strong as other regions in Africa, it's important for us to now have very open and strict conversations about what needs to be done and what needs to be done yesterday. And this is the only way you can even get private sector come in to play a part to support policy. So that went well. It wasn't a talk shop in my opinion, and I'm pretty happy with it, and I'm hoping everyone in the nation and the region is as well.
All right, thank you very much, Masimba and Abigail. Your assessment as well, also given the other events as Masimba highlighted, talking about the seventh SADC Industrialization Week, which took place in the last week of July, and all other events in the run-up to the summit of the heads of state. Your assessment of all the events in the lead-up to the summit and the summit itself.
Well, thank you so very much. I think I will concur and agree with the first speaker there. I think overall, Zimbabwe was at a test, even to hold a successful summit of this magnitude, looking at the level of interest that it raised across all sectors. Yes, we saw the industrialization week. Of interest is the inclusion aspect. I was there. I noted that even women in business, they were also having a platform. We saw the People's Summit coming in, where the SADC had to engage non-state actors. The issues of inclusion, gender, equity and equality coming on board. We had such a platform online, even on physical interaction, or to get the opportunity for the people in general also to input, notwithstanding the fact that in most of these interactions, even at the public lecture, we saw the high-profile government officials and diplomats, including even His Excellency, having an opportunity one-on-one with the masses. For me, most of these events actually played a crucial role to bring the sense of ownership of this event, ownership into the citizens of SADC. So as we move even faster forward, you'd realize that the warm hospitality, we saw even security guaranteed, we saw it flowing peacefully. To this end, I think the general assessment is that so far so good. We saw the actual events flowing and linking one after the other.
All right, thank you very much, Abigail. And Dr. Kaseke, your thoughts, your reflections on the summit.
Thank you very much, Linda. If you look in terms of the summit, there were a lot of activities or events leading to the summit. For example, the Industrialization Week, where we have seen different companies, different countries exhibiting the different forms of products and innovations that they've done, and also the linkages that they've also created between the Zimbabwean companies and other companies, which is more on the economic sense in terms of how different businesses, different traders can also link with each other. Then if you come to the industrialization seminar or lecture that was actually presented by His Excellency at the University of Zimbabwe, you realize that he actually showcased how Africa, Zimbabwe, can also make its own products, can also produce its own innovations that can now be used actually to produce more goods and services, that can actually be used to model whatever we are now seeing coming from other countries in terms of products, in terms of different innovations, which are being done by different universities in Zimbabwe, which now have got some different forms of innovations up, which are actually meant to innovate and produce different goods and services. Now, if you come to the actual summit, we now realize that it was now more like icing the cake in terms of what has been done in terms of the previous events. I think the actual summit was actually a good opportunity for doing business. We have also seen that people in the tourism sector welcomed the summit because they also benefited as a result of the summit. Like what the guy from Masimba said, that even the infrastructure, we are actually happy with part of the infrastructure that we are seeing, which came as a result of the summit. So all these are the positives that have been brought in by the summit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kaseke. Now Leopold, Masimba and Dr. Kaseke have alluded to the infrastructure legacy, which we've spoken about. You've been part of the shows and the run-up to the summit. Let's talk about the venue, Mount Hampton, the new Parliament building. In your view, what was the significance of the summit being held in Mount Hamden in 2014. When Zimbabwe last hosted the summit before this one, it was held in Victoria Falls. We have had other international and regional events such as these being held in Victoria Falls. And Zimbabweans, being Zimbabweans, the humor they have, they find around. I saw a comment which said, Baba Bona vaisada zvinovanetsa vaingotande kuVic Falls. And may his soul rest in peace. In your view, what is the significance? Masimba alluded to the issue of the inconveniences that motorists and other road users experienced as we were seeing the infrastructure, the development that was taking place. Why, in your view, Mount Hamden? What was the significance for it to be held there?
Mount Hamden, in its own, it's actually one of the centers of power because it houses one of the arms of state, the legislature. It's housed in Mount Hamden. So I think the venue was quite significant in the sense that, one, it was accessible, right, in terms of leaders going to meet there than going to meet in a hotel. Secondly, it's in terms of security. I would think the venue was quite secure as well and would allow visitors to come and sit, have the meeting there. And of course, the other factor is, it's one of our icon project, I think, that we've also done in the past years. And so that it gave, it was one of the pride of Zimbabwe to go and have that particular event at Mount Hamden.
All right, and Abigail, you'd like to come in and weigh in your thoughts on the issue of the venue as well?
Like I said, it's about demonstrating the capacity. It's about showcasing that we are able to do. And the doc has just hammered, we have been into infrastructure development a little way before even SADC. And I have been following as we were engaging that many people were enjoying the developments. Some say, why now? But the truth is, SADC is just here only probably to confirm and actually clear certain averments that have been made against Zimbabwe, or also to try and water down that which we are able to do. I think actually it was exemplary, it was necessary, it was due for Zimbabwe to showcase our own capacity. And if you look at that multi-purpose kind of building, I think the region also had a lot to learn. As we were actually, the president and Zimbabwe in particular, taking over the chairpersonship position, it was good to lead by example.
All right, thank you very much. And let's look now at, of course, the highlight of the summit. President Mnangagwa's ascendancy to the chairmanship of the bloc. Now, how can Zimbabwe leverage on this, as well as, of course, we have Foreign Affairs Minister Frederick Shaba being chairperson of the SADC Council of Ministers. How can Zimbabwe leverage on this, Leopold, to push for regional integration as well as cementing its foreign policy? Of what benefit is it? We really want to continue dissecting this, what it means to us as Zimbabweans.
I think we need to go back into understanding the functions and the role or the importance of SADC as an organization per se, the issues that they discuss or the issues that they deal with as an organization. So you have different arms, right, or institutions that are there under SADC. You have the organ on politics, defense, security, and cooperation, which deals with peace and security issues. So SADC does have that particular organ that deals with peace and security issues. We currently had SADC mission in Mozambique, I think, which was actually withdrawn recently, and we also currently have another mission in DRC, which is actually in operation. That's one of the roles that SADC actually does. And then you look at the objectives. When you read the SADC Charter, we are looking at the objectives of SADC. It deals with issues of poverty alleviation. It deals with issues of regional integration, economic development. So we are saying when you put all these that SADC deals with, and then you put Zimbabwe now being the chair of that organ, it means we are now at the driving seat to push the agenda of regional integration. When you look again at the theme of this year, it's focusing on innovation and industrialization, right? And then you come back to Zimbabwe, you look at the things that we have been doing over the past 6 years. These have been also key interest areas for Zimbabwe, because we have been focusing on innovation. We have established innovation hubs, and when it comes to industrialization, I think it has also been one of the key areas that we have been focusing in. And therefore, what it then means is it gives us that opportunity to transfer that knowledge which we have obtained, the experience that we would have obtained over the last years, to a regional level. So it's important that we are coming in at this time. Another objective as well that SADC deals with is poverty alleviation. You see it again in the SADC Charter. And it's another area that Zimbabwe has also been focusing on. Over the past 5 years, we have seen that the president has had a number of programs that are meant to eradicate poverty. Programs such as the village business centers, the sinking of boreholes in all the villages. So these initiatives, we are saying SADC on its own also deals with these issues because it's one of its objectives. So we are saying the experience we are getting as Zimbabwe and what we have done so far works as an example to the region on what can be done in terms of poverty alleviation.
All right, it is a few seconds before we get into the news at 7 o'clock now. Indaba, you are tuned to Star FM, and this is a post-mortem of the SADC Summit that was held this past weekend. Of course, we did have other events in the lead-up to the actual summit, such as the SADC Industrialization Week. We had the Badia Investment Forum. We had the public lecture that was delivered by the president at the University of Zimbabwe, and then the meeting of the heads of state and government that took place on Saturday. And yesterday they did tour Geo Pomona Waste Management Center, and they did also tour the African Museum, Liberation Museum in Harare, as with that commitment that the region should preserve its rich history, and commitments by member states that they will contribute artifacts that will contribute to the preservation of that history. So do come through with your views. My studio WhatsApp number is 0772162651. I am Linda Muriro, and we continue the discussion after the news at 7 o'clock. Makaterera kumetengero yesta FM tokupai now indaba.
Broadcasting Division.
Manero akanaka nawo muneniswa nyingosove. Vanozeya nyaya dzezvematongerwo enyika vanoti vane chivimbo chekuti utungamiri hwemutungamiri wenyika huchabatsira zvikuru dunhu rekuchamhembe kweAfrica reSADC. Emerson Mnangagwa ndivo vakatora chigaro chekurosa chigaro wesangano reSADC pamusangano weSADC uchangobva kuitwa munyika muno. Murukuro yavaita nevatapina weZimpepers Radio News, Dr. Leopold Chakanyuka, vaGodwin Mureriwa pamwe navaLazarus Sauti varumbidza danho iri vakati utungamiri hwavaMnangagwa hunofambidzana zvikuru nechisungo chebudiriro chenyika, izvo zvichabatsirawo dunhu reSADC. Zimbabwe iri kuenderera mberi nechirongwa chayo chekukwezva vana muzvinabhizimisi vekune dzimwe nyika vanoda kuzovamba zvirongwa zvavo munyika muno. Kutaura kuno, mutevedzeri wemutungamiri wenyika Dr. Constantino Chiwenga vari kuNew Delhi kuIndia, uko vari kupinda musangano wechigumi weAfrica Conclave uri kutanga mangwana. Musangano uyu wakananga kusimbaradza ukama pakati penyika yeIndia nenyika dzemuAfrica, zvikuru sei muzvikamu zvekutengeserana, chezveutano pamwe nezvezvicherwa kuitira budiriro yenyika idzi. Mapurisa ekuSouth Africa asunga chimwe chizvarwa chekuZambia chiri kupomerwa mhosva yekupamba zvikuru sei vana muzvinabhizimisi kusanganisa nomwe wemuno aishandira munyika uyu mushure kuda kuripwa mazimari akawanda. Mutauriri wemapurisa aya Brigadier Outlander Mate vati musungwa uyu akabatwa achangoburuka ndege panhandare OR Tambo International Airport nezuro vaendera mberi vakati musungwa uyu achawedzerwa zvakare dzimwe mhosva dzinosanganisa dzekutengesa zvinodhaka. Muna Machi wegore rino murume uyu nechikwata chake vakapamba muzvinabhizimisi wemuno vaEvans Katumba muDurban vakaudza vemhuri yake kuti vaida kuripwa 2.5 million rand kuti vamusunungure, kunyange zvazvo mhuri yakatumba vakakwanisa kuunganidza 1.5 million rand. Mhondi idzi dzakamuuraya dzikanokanda mutumbi wake mune imwe munda uri padyo nepamba pake. Idzi dzanga dziri nawo iko zvino vangoenda varambai makateerera.
Indaba kuZim Papers Radio Broadcasting Division.
Abacubunguli bendaba zombusazwe bathi balethemba lokubana ubukhokheli bukamongameli uMnumzana Emmerson Mnangagwa buzaphathisa kakhulu umkhono wangezansi ye-Afrika owe-SADC. Umongameli nguye othethe isikhundla sokuba ngumgcinisihlalo wenhlanganiso ye-SADC emhlanganweni obekhona eHarare kunsukwana esanda kwedlula. Kunkulumo abelayo lentatheli izindaba zeZim Papers Radio News uDr Leopold Chakanyuka, uMnumzana Godwin Muririwa loMnumzana Lazarus Sauti bancome kakhulu inyathelo leli abathe ubukhokheli bukamongameli buhambelana lezibopho zelizwe ezentuthuko okuzaphathisa njalo iSADC. iZimbabwe iqhubekela phambili ngohlelo lwayo lokuhuga abamabhizinisi bakwamanye amazwe ukuze bazosungula inhlelo zabo kuleli. Sikhuluma nje umsekeli kamongameli uDr Constantino Chiwenga use-India lapho azahlanganyela labanye emhlanganweni we-Africa Conclave oqalisa kusasa. Umhlangano lo wesishumi lasitshiyagalolunye ujonge uqinisa ubudlelwano be-India lamazwe ase-Afrika ikakhulu kunhlangothi ezibalisa olwempilakahle ezenziwayo kanye lokuthengiselana. Amapholisa kwele South Africa sebophe esinye isizalwane sakwele Zambia esetheswa umlando wokuthumba ikakhulu somabhizinisi abahlanganisa lomunye wakuleli obasebenzela kulelo lizwe kade lapho sebefuna ukuhlawulwa. Isikhulumeli samapholisa uBrigadier Linda Muriro uthe isibotshwa lesi sibanjwe sisanda kufika egcekeni lendizamtshina ele-OR Tambo International Airport izolo. Uqhubekele phambili wathi isibotshwa lesi silakho ukungezelelwa icala lokuthengisa izidakamizwa. NgoMashi lonyaka isibotshwa lesi lequla lakhe bathumbe uMnumzana Evans Katumba eDurban batshela abemuli yakhe ukuthi bahlawule i-2.5 million rand ukuze bamkhulule, lanxa nje abemuli benelise ukuthelela i-1.5 million rand. Izigangi lezi zimbulele zaphosela isidumbu sakhe kwelinye isimo duzane lendlu yakhe. Bekuzindaba igama lami nguSibe Inkosobe libe lokulalela okuhle.
On Faith on Trial, we ask what the lifestyle of a young Christian should be like. How can people find a balance between fun and enjoying their youth and living in a way that pleases God?
So that I don't end up regretting when I'm now older and regretting why I made certain choices when I was still young.
As Faith on Trial tonight with ET at 8.
This is Muriro on Monday on Star FM. Muriro on Monday. Brace yourself. It's a hard hat.
Many thanks to Sibongiko Sihove for giving us now Indaba. It is 6 minutes after 7 o'clock and you are tuned to Star FM, sounding good all the time. I am Linda Muriro and tonight we discuss post-mortem of this just ended SADC Summit, and I'm joined in studio by infrastructure development expert Masimba Marangwanda, economist Dr. Nyasha Kaseke, and political analyst Dr. Leopold Chakanyuka and Abigail Mopambi. Do come through on 0772162651 with your contributions, and I will be opening the phone lines. Some interesting messages that are already coming through. Now, before I go back to Masimba and Abigail, the issue of regional integration that Leopold has spoken of, some have said that SADC has not really been able to really push the issue of regional integration, particularly conflict resolution and silencing the gun. We still have conflicts in the DRC, communities being displaced. What is it that needs to be done to effectively end conflict in the region and to ensure effective regional integration within SADC, the SADC region?
Thank you so very much once more. The issue of conflict, I'm sure, is a cause of concern. And to think that nothing hasn't been done probably fairly, I don't think it's fair, because even as we ended this very summit, we got some good news even from the president, outgoing chairperson, president of Angola, President João Lourenço, actually tabling that he has already managed to start a Luanda peace process, where he is bringing together, of course, the key people who matter, key presidents like President Kagame and, of course, President Felix Tshisekedi. So, if you look at that, those are ways. Before we talk of actually issues of an invasion, many people believe that when there is a conflict, we must respond gun to gun. But there is processes that needs to be followed in terms of diplomatic ties that exist both at multilateral level and at bilateral level. You would appreciate that even in Cabo Delgado today, we got a report that actually the mission is about to sum up, and the Mozambican president is assured that on the ground things are actually cooling down. He assured the region that they will make sure that the gains that have already been obtained through the intervention of the SADC mission in Mozambique, they will make sure that they will consolidate such and make sure that they will continue to protect, or most importantly, the ordinary citizens. So much as we are going to say, how do we probably deal with the issues of minimizing further conflict, is a question of also solidarity, a question of making sure that also we close all the loopholes. Talk about issues of neo-colonialism, talk about issues of the M23's rebels, talk about how do we wake up in the morning with an enemy in the house. It starts with us. So actually it's a question of commitment itself, which I refer personally to the question of ideology. We need to take care of the curriculum and the content that we feed within the youths, because the biggest threat on the weaker side, which can actually be also a positive to any country, any region, is the labor force, the youths, the active ones. So I think people really need to be well socialized into who they are, where are they coming from. An idea that I think actually is also being amplified by the existence, this of course lead role by Zimbabwe also to come up with the African museum, which actually will be going to incorporate the history of liberation movements. So I think
before we
yes.
dive deep into that,
Yes.
let me bring in Dr. Kaseke. Critics say that SADC has failed to remove trade barriers as envisaged by the African Continental Free Trade Area. We still have we still levy duties on each other despite claims of regional and solidarity and brotherhood. How can SADC ensure or realize full regional integration and cooperation, Dr. Kaseke?
Thank you very much, Linda. If you look in terms of how countries do trade, there's a lot that we learn in terms of the trading that we do. For example, if you look in terms of Zimbabwe, our major trading partner is most likely South Africa, followed by Zambia within the region, Zambia and other countries. But if we open up all your borders, we would now have products from other countries flooding into your country, and which means whatever you are going to produce are not going to face all the market. And if you allow that to happen, then we continue having what a problem that whatever you are going to produce is not going to have its own what market. Therefore, this is one of the reasons why sometimes we have these trade barriers being imposed, so that we also promote whatever we are producing within our own country being produced, sold and consumed in that country. And now if you also look in terms of this to do with the trade is also being done based on what we call comparative advantage and also absolute advantage. If a country is able to produce better than another country, it means that that country can trade with other countries in terms of whatever they are able to produce better than other countries. Now, if you look in terms of Zimbabwe at the moment right now, our cost of production, our cost drivers are so very high as compared to other countries in the region. If we cannot compare our cost of production with Zambia, we can't compare our cost of production with South Africa. And if we allow these countries again to continue producing and flooding our markets, it means that we'll be killing our own water industry. So one of the reasons why sometimes countries have to put trade barriers, whether they are tariff or non-tariff barriers, is to make sure that they protect their own water industry in that country. And this is the reason why you look in terms of most of such countries, they've got these trade barriers because they want to protect their own local industry in terms of that country. So
how then do we ensure, Masimba, if I could bring you in, I know you're an infrastructure expert, but how then do we ensure regional integration? Some critics have also said that SADC is trading with the East and the West, people going to China to buy trinkets, fertilizer still being imported, instead of marshalling resources at regional level to set up plants in one country. What is it that needs to be done to enhance trade among SADC countries and not this preference of buying from overseas?
So, just to go back to what the doc was saying, in my past life, I was doing advisory for the Minister of Industry, Samite Bima. And one thing I always used to talk about when it came to tariff barriers was we should always put a timeline to it. If I'm to sit with a company and say we are going to protect this market, we should give a timeline to say we're giving you 5 years to invest in all the things that give you the competitive advantage, so that companies don't sit back and say we are protected and nothing happens. Because eventually, for the region to become strong, we need to trade amongst each other. And so when you look at what you're talking about, the integration is going to be important, but at a fair level. Construction, what SADC showed, and I'm going to take a step back, was the ability for our value chain to build things in a very short space of time. A long time ago, would bring in South African contractors in the mines. Here we have shown that we have capacitated our industries and our value chains to grow in capacity so that we can equally compete, not only from just having machinery, but also from a price point. And this is what is going to be required for the region to move together and then do value chain integration within the region, where Zimbabwe can make one part of something very well that we can then move into Zambia and they make another part, just like in the airline industry. In Europe, they do that. You have 4 or 5 pieces of an aeroplane, the engine coming from the UK, the barge coming from France, all going into Germany to do the final assembly. And the whole region benefits from that integration. When we do that, then we look at reducing our imports in the bigger scheme of things. But it's important that we identify those industries we know we can do very well, and then move to support them within a time frame that makes sense. So that is how I see that we need to look at it.
All right, thank you, Masimba. An interesting message coming through on WhatsApp platform here. High on significance of Mount Hamden. There are also historical considerations. Pioneer Column wanted to establish capital city there. It's a rich area mineral-wise, so perhaps the ancestors wanted us to build the capital. That's a contribution that has come. Keep them coming on 0772 162 651 as we review the just ended SADC Summit. I'm joined in studio by political analysts Dr. Leopold Chakanyuka as well as Abigail Mpambi, economist Dr. Nyasha Kasege, as well as Masimba, who is an infrastructure development expert. And I will be opening the phone lines. Already they are buzzing, so I will be taking some calls. Let me get into it. Star FM, good evening.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, how are you?
Okay,
Alright, SADC in terms of industrialization, what you're telling is like let's say Zimbabwe, major project that's SADC not just like road kana tida waka power generation yemagetsi, like even kuKariba or somewhere. SADC inepa inobatsira here kuti nyika dzose dzemuSADC dzinozofandawo kana kuti alright SADC ine mabanks here ainayo akazvimirira kuti ukaitika emergency neimwe nyika unokwanisa kutora mari muhomwe iyoyo achiisa kune nyika iyoyo.
Number 2.
In terms of infrastructure, for example, like muno muZimbabwe tine major road inobatanidza Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and then Zimbabwe, Zambia. Tichida kugadzira maroads chaizvo kune mastandards ari in SADC, within the SADC ekuti wanofollowa mastandards iwayo ekuti because haufana kuzoti uchida kuenda kuDRC obva muZimbabwe muno muroad yakanaka wosvika muZambia wamumaportugal and iyo iri muSADC. Then nenawo ema-relations ekuti in terms of kugamuchirana chachaiko ukaenda kuBotswana unoona kuti isusu vanhu hatisi kugamuchirana. Unotoita kunge muforeigner atobva amheni kure kure, but vatungamiriri vanenge vachikurudzira kubatana kuita sei whatever, but in terms of kugamuchirana chachaiko pane zvavari kukwaniswa kuita here kuti vanhu maordinary citizens ari munyika dzeSADC vakwanisa kugamuchirana kuti no, munhu muZambian but is my brother, is my sister, muBotswana kana kuti muSouth Africa.
Aiwa, tinoda kukutendai zvikuru hanzvadzi nekubvunza mibvunzo yakakosha ine hudzamu chaiyo ende ndine mimwe mibvunzo yandanichabvunza asi ndifunga mabva mandibatsira mukubvunza. Regai ndipe vadare vemuno maunzwa mubvunzo masimba issue of standardization of the infrastructure. You are the experts panyaya borderless SADC kugamuchirana zviri kutaurika izvi at that high level yema-heads of state. How does it filter down zvichizodzika pasi kuvagari vari munyika idzodzi zvizvarwa zvemuSADC kuti patinofamba zveshuwa brotherhood and sisterhood iyoyi hatisi kuda kungoiona panoitwa family picture yaya yatakaona inotorwa panomira madzitungamiriri enyika vachitorwa. We've seen that brotherhood at that highest level. Is it filtering down to the citizenry of SADC, Masimba, and the issues that he has raised? But maybe let me take 2 more calls and then Sama kupindura. Stephen, good evening. Hello. Tinofara kana muchifarawo.
Ndinoda kubvira muZimbabwe nyaya yeSADC. SADC isusu taraone hanikuta development ini ndakaita koseka pendi asi kuti ndipinze machinery handikwanisi jutsasa haiti. Saka SADC inoona sokuti inobetsera maindividual haibetseri vanhu vomuSADC. Botswana ine ma-individual inobetsera ari kumusoro haibetseri ini ari kufaso. Saka SADC waste of time yekutaura iyo itoita zvimwe zvokuti ngatitoita sei nokuti muno muZimbabwe infrastructure yaisi yerodzoka magesi hakuna. Linda 1 tax yomuno yakanyanyisa kuti ugadzire chinhu it's very expensive kuti chitengesa kuBotswana. Toti lese cost tikusema US ngatisenze our own currency sezvezvinoita munyika.
Aiwa, tinotenda chaizvo. Maunzwa umwe mubvunzo zviri kunyatsobatsira here zvizvarwa zvemuSADC kana kuti pavari kungoonana vachisangana nevatungamiriri venyika vachiita matoza avo brotherhood ende tinoiona zveshuwa tichiona muzvivhitivhiti the brotherhood that is there that was established kukare kubva madays liberation struggle. We've seen that brotherhood, but is it filtering down to the people is what the listeners are asking. Star FM, good evening.
Hello, Linda.
Taswera maswera wamapinda mchirongwa.
Ndinoti ndoda kutaura pamusoro peconstitution yeSADC yatinge tinayo. Pekutanga ndoda kutaura kuti ndinocheka seri isusu senyika tabhinesika pakuti paitika infrastructure development taona kuvakwa kweparliament iyo yatabva tazoshandisa nezvimwe zvayauya nazvo. And also maroads akagadzira nekumhanya kunyanya chiti tinozonyara kana senyika padziitapo. And also kufamba netsiri industrialization isusu tichiratidza kuti zvatokwanisa kuita senyika ndezvipi. But ndine rimwe randiri kuona risina kunyatsofamba zvakanaka pastudy saka SADC yatiri kuzobenefita region sei. Ndivona takati kutaura nekangaka tikataura bhodha rekuenda kuDRC neZambia. Apa rinenge rakavharwa richaziva kuti razovhurwa kuti Zambia yakariedza DRC yakati hatisingati nkuno but ishiyo haina kubata SADC. Vakangouya vakasvogara maleaders aya vachisekererana vachirowana kumapendekete kuti tikugona but immediate issue kuti imwe yabvarira imwe kuti isatrade kana kuti imwe yabvarira imwe kuti imwe isadhambe saka zvozvo sei hazvina kutaura. Tikatarisa isusu muno muZimbabwe muno isusu tiri kutokuvadza regional trade. Mukaona mafirms ari kuZambia kana kuDRC anoimpota fuel achitora kuMozambique kubheira ezvinonzi vanonzi vabhadhare Djibouti. Munhu apendisa fuel kuDRC anonzi abhadhare fuel Djibouti paFox border. Mari yacho ozoitorera kuChirungu border. Paanoshova Chirungu border kwacho mari yacho inenge isiku zvinonzi omirira neno mazuva isu tagara mutsuru hatina mari idzodzo but takutouraya trade yacho trade yeregion and at the same time totourayawo isusu mari dzatakabhadha matransit fees echimotokari dziri kupfuura nemuno ende tikatarisa futi kuti isusu seSADC region yacho and tikuti isusu we are part of the Africa as a whole village. Hatisokwanisa kualaina mitemo yedu isusu neAfrica.
Aiwa, tinotenda chaizvo. Tinoda kuti vamwe vateereri vakwanise kupinda zvakare tigowana mukana wekupindura mibvunzo yacho yamuri kubvunza neyabvunzwa nevamwe vateereri. Saka pane dzino nguva ndofunga zvemataura vabata. I'll now come back to my panelists, beginning with you, Masimba, to respond to the issues that have been raised by the three or so callers vataura nyaya kuti hazvisi kubatika. It's a talk show. Hatisi kuzviona zvichibatika on the ground. Yes, the leaders are meeting, they're coming up with these resolutions nezvisungo izvi asi hazvisi kubatika pasi.
So I think I'll answer question 1 and 2 from your first caller. And industrialization which one chandakaraisa was government and the region's failure to communicate effective to their implementers. And I'm touching on because you see a lot of people think sometimes one should not because a good example is 29 April 2015. You touched on it by introduction. Mugabe introduced the SADC industrialization strategy and roadmap 2015 to 2063. Even by wiki SADC, it wasn't really highlighted. So this is not new industrialization. Zhakawea when chairmanship was last in Zimbabwe. And as your caller asked, so how does SADC as a region come to help to answer these problems? In that document, they created what they called the SADC Regional Development Fund, which helps the region to look at infrastructure industrialization projects that need to come together, whilst talking to the major funders out there, your World Banks, IMFs, looking at your developmental projects. But these things happen at a slow pace, and I was able to and these are the things that need to happen. So it goes to that question, how does the region come to say, like right now, DRC has what they call the Inga Dam, which has potential to generate close to 40 gigawatts of power. That is just simple. Wange 7 and 8 generates 1 gigawatt of magets. That essentially means that when you're doing 40, DRC has got the potential to take care of the whole region from one central point. And that is a project that is required as part of the industrialization. To get that project underway, we ensure that power is going to become far cheaper in the region, with the potential to export all the way up this electricity. So it's the communication and the implementation that people might not know, and it's understandable on wakaita frustration kuti in andisikuona region ichiuya kunobatsira member countries. It was communication you high school answer. And that's my contribution to the questions.
All right, Abigail or Dr. Kaseke, Abigail would like to, okay, let's do a round of responding to the issues, the concerns that have been raised before we move on to the next set of questions. Yes, Abigail.
Thank you so very much. And maybe let me also respond to the issue of why is it that we don't appreciate, maybe we don't feel the unity ourselves. I also want to say, when these things do happen at a SADC level, and the member states actually, they do recommend or adopt certain motions, but then they have to go back to their individual countries and begin to ratify. After ratifying, this is a general acceptance that yes, indeed, we want integration with Zimbabwe and other countries in terms of energy. From there, they have to domesticate. They have within their own member have come to you. Now you know that there is a development framework, there is a SADC strategy on development, there is a number of projects that actually have to touch you. Do you know that over the years, some people are actually hearing it today that SADC has been there from 1980. Some are even hearing that in 1982 it was modified. But this time around, we must of course appreciate that the messaging, the noise, the alerts, they've been everywhere. Once that has happened, it means the region is now able to collectively move the agendas of SADC, because everyone now has a say. Even these leaders, they are there to stand in our gap. Yes, they'll be having such statutory mandates to stand in our gap. But at the end of the day, it should be the citizens of SADC who will be speaking, like the way they are speaking. For me, that is satisfactory on its own. So, coming to the issue of the DRC Zambia that will be happening, you must appreciate that there's an animal called diplomatic ties that exist, bilateral relations that happen. Yes, SADC can actually be speaking at policy level. They need to come together, they need to talk of the borderless, but between each member state, there are bilateral relations that also exist.
But at the point that we have instruments that are signed and how is that benefiting? Are we seeing coordination and uniformity? Recently, President Ramaphosa of South Africa signed the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act into law, which has far-reaching reforms around South Africa's country electricity sector, including establishment of a competitive electricity market. How does that feed into the region? What is Zimbabwe doing? Zvakafanana nezvozvo. Malawi, Zambia, irikuitei, pane muteerera abva kutaura nyaya yekuti nyaya dze-infrastructure. I was hoping Masimba would speak into that. Standardization, the SADC Summit year 2012 signed the Regional Infrastructure Development Master Plan, which guides development in key infrastructure such as roads, rail and ports, and the framework here for planning and cooperation. Are we seeing that on the ground? Harare Chirundu, kusvika kuborder. Ordinarily, I think that distance should take maybe 5 hours, 8 hours. Wosvika paborder pacho, it's a one-stop border. Vamwe vari kuti havana magetsi, zvinhu zvamira, uchiyambuka, road smooth, and that about cooperation. How is it working, Dr. Kaseke?
Thank you very much, Linda. Let me start by answering one of the questions where we now say that there's no regional cooperation. If you look in terms of Zimbabwe, Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana, we now have more of Kazungula border, which was actually constructed by these countries as a way of easing transport within the region. This really shows that there is cooperation in terms of what some SADC countries. And now these have actually eased the transportation in terms of goods between or among these countries. Now, if you look in terms of Zimbabwe, I think, Masimba, you are aware that we are now trying to introduce SADC road signs, even in terms of our road networks, which can now be used within the SADC region, so that if you go to any other SADC countries, we will still have the use of the same road signs. And if we now look in terms of the construction of our road network, they are also trying to mirror the image in terms of type of road that we are also seeing in the SADC, so that the transporters, the road users, would almost use the same road. Then it's to do with there's no easiness in terms of movement of people. Some SADC countries with their bilateral relations are trying. For example, the one-stop border post. We have one in Chirundu in Zimbabwe, where we now try to ease the movement of people between Zimbabwe and Zambia. So this is also some form of integration that we are seeing being done by other countries. Then if you also look in terms of electricity, in the region we have got the Southern African power pool. The main thrust of the Southern African power pool is to say the one with excess supply of electricity can share or can actually give to other countries which have no enough electricity supply. This is also coming in as a result of this is to do with regionalism. Then I want to also try to answer one of the questions that have been posed, whereby we pay duty at Forbes border post and then we are not getting the money at Chirundu border post. The issue is what was happening is very simple. There were other people who were actually claiming that the fuel is going to Zambia, and this fuel is not reaching Zambia. It is lost somewhere within the country. And as a result of that, I think Zimri has now given the mandate to now say, let's track what is happening to this fuel. If you pay duty here, and if you go and collect it at the Chirundu, we are now sure that this is fuel which was not meant for Zimbabwe, it was meant for Zambia. So it was more like a tracking mechanism that the country has tried to put in place to try to reduce maybe the corruption practice that was there. Way, but it's a way of the government also trying to control, to try to put some stopgap measures in terms of some ill practices that other people are actually doing. I think
Leopold, would you like to also comment on the calls, the issues before we move on?
All right, okay, I can just comment briefly. So I think one of the major challenges that we have is an issue of interest and capacity, sometimes in terms of implementing what would have been agreed at SADC level. I'll give you an example. Masimba mentioned the SADC Development Fund. Of course, there is an agreement, there is actually a protocol to establish the SADC Development Fund. But up to today, there is only one country that has ratified the protocol. I think the issue was even raised by the Executive Secretary. He continuously raised that particular factor to say countries need to ratify. Because if a treaty, if a protocol is signed or it's given, but not yet ratified by 2/3 of members of SADC, it cannot be operational. So therefore, it has to be signed or ratified by at least 10 members for it to be operational. That's one challenge. Then you go to the issue of trade. I was also listening to some of the statistics. He spoke about the presence of barriers and so forth. They are actually not promoting industrialization or development, but rather they are affecting regional trade. Because I was looking at the statistics that were actually being reported. They were saying, as they were talking, that right now intra-regional trade stands at about 20%, as compared to EU, which is at about 50 or 60%, right? So why is it that trade within our region is limiting? Of course, we do have the SADC Free Trade Area, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we have the COMESA. These are free trade areas, right? But again, we still have challenges in terms of that. So it comes back again to the issue of implementation, because countries sometimes they have that fear of unknown. Sometimes they can't open their borders, right? Or sometimes also the issue of information, because when you implement a free trade area, there are specific goods that are actually listed. But then the question becomes, how many people know of these specific goods that you can actually trade duty-free? Many people don't know. So at the end of the day, we say, well, SADC is not actually helping because we don't have the information as to what type of products can we trade under this particular free trade area, because there are certain limitations. Of course, there are issues of anti-dumping that also government have to come in as a way of protecting their industry. But at the same time, it's an issue of making sure that information is shared. Then you talk about the issue of acceptance of people. SADC does have a protocol on the free movement of people. African Union as well does have it. But then it comes back to the issue again of security. So you have recently in Zimbabwe, I think we launched, it should be last week, the online integrated border management system recently. We didn't have that. So which means when you don't have that particular system, you also don't want to play with your border security. So you have to take measures to protect, but I'm not saying that should be the basis upon which countries can discriminate against citizens of another country from within the region. But what SADC does will be to say, well, let's remove barriers that limits people from traveling from one country to another. We remove the visa. Right now within the SADC region, we don't have the visa requirement. You can go to any country within the SADC region, visa free. But again, when it comes now to the implementation of that particular protocol, a country also now has to look at some certain, technical issues as they're implementing it. Because you don't want also to just open your border and then allow everyone to come because, in the name of regional integration. Because it also has consequences in terms of security, in terms of economic development, in terms of culture. So you want to deal with these issues in a way that also you protect your sovereignty and your, integrity.
All right. So I guess all these are some of the challenges or the issues that lie ahead for the president during his tenure as a chairperson of SADC. And an article that was written that was in the Sunday Mail, which makes reference to that SADC member states are unanimous that the sub-region is rich in mineral and natural resources as well as skilled human resources, which can be leveraged on to drive success, and the region contributing to the world about 18% of cobalt, 21% of zinc, 26% of gold, and 55% of diamonds, and 72% of platinum, a group of metals. And the region also having some of the biggest wildlife conservation areas in the world, which are luring to tourists from across the globe. And of course, the president highlighting the need for the region to ensure that it reaps maximum benefits from these natural and mineral resources. The question then is how and when, because it's there, and how and when is it going to be done? Because the talk has been there, value addition and beneficiation. So yeah, do come through, continue with your contributions on 0772162651, and I see the phone lines are buzzing. Yes, before I take some calls.
I just wanted to add something, to what you have just said. I was just looking at this, as you were speaking, in terms of having resources. It has actually become a challenge, because when you look at the SADC countries, we focus on primarily same kind of industry. We are all in the primary industry where we are producing almost similar goods. So at the end of the day, if we produce diamond, we can't sell diamond to to Botswana because Botswana also produces diamond. We now have to sell diamond to another continent because they can actually value add. So that's where one of the problem is, where we don't value add. If we are able now to add value to that particular diamond, South Africa can be able to buy our diamond, can be able to buy our gold. But if we can't do that, then we have a problem.
Yes, I think the issue is beyond the SADC region itself, beyond the continent, so to speak. There is high demand, but then the region then shortchanging itself in relying on exporting raw mineral materials as opposed to trading in finished products.
And that's what now we are trying to cover with, you know, for example, the issue of Manidze. It's actual issue of value addition where we're saying let's value add, let's produce it Manidze. If we are able to produce steel there, we can then sell the steel. So that's what we're trying to focus on in terms of this year's theme, industrialization.
And the summit reiterated, Abigail, the regional call made at the 39th SADC Summit for the unconditional removal of sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe, and acknowledged that the sanctions continue to hinder the progress and prosperity of not just the Zimbabwean people, but the entire SADC region. How effective has SADC been in lobbying for the removal of the sanctions, Abigail?
Thank you so very much. I think unless we reach a point when we are going to have the SADC actually taking a next step to back Zimbabwe economically and probably joining hands with Zimbabwe in what we have been talking about, the industrialization of SADC, that can actually bounce and actually and best the sanctions that are imposed on Zimbabwe. It means that the lobby is not enough. Yes, it's good that in terms of solidarity, in terms of energizing Zimbabwe, yes, we have seen SADC taking a clear stance there. But because the sanctions are targeting Zimbabwe economically, I want to believe that now that the president is actually going to be on the driving of the SADC policy direction, I think that we need a political will, we need economic will from member states to begin, of course, to take, like the question you've been asking about, to say, we have talked enough, we have said innovation. For me, I think we need now to join hands, not to compete amongst and between ourselves as SADC. We need a serious skills audit, even within our own labor force, and say, what is that which we are able to do? What does our industry demand? Right now, we'll be boasting around an educated citizenry that may actually be offering something that is relevant in Europe, not here.
Before we move to the human resources, what more, Leopold? I don't know if Dr. Kaseki, you can come through. Needs to be done by SADC to ensure the complete and unconditional removal of sanctions on Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Linda. If you look in terms of SADC countries, we all have our different sources of finance or funding in terms of different countries. And because like what Linda said, that most of these member countries are not actually 100% united towards this issue to do with the sanctions, because they fear that if they come in for Zimbabwe, their funding is going to dry up. Their source of funding is going to dry up. So as long as we don't solve that problem of individualism in terms of countries when it comes to funding, yes, they may come in to try to lobby, but the strength of the lobby is not as good as if we are speaking with one voice, that if you don't want to give us your resources, stay with your resources. But as a SADC countries, we are moving forward in terms of this. We will still continue having this problem in terms of sanctions, because if it has been imposed to another country and not to another country, it might be not fair, or it might not make sense for me to fight for my colleague or for my brother, if I don't have anything that I benefit much after even if the sanction has been removed. So we need to look in terms of how best that we can use to make these countries come together and fight with one voice in terms of the removal of sanctions.
All right, before I come to you, Masimba, to talk more about infrastructure development as a vehicle or catalyst for regional integration, let's take some more calls. Start from Gridi.
Hello,
Taswera maswerawo.
Ya, tikutonga nechirongwa cheimage. Asi isu semacitizen, chichemo chedu chinenge tiri chekuti zvinhu zvambotaurika kuti vakuru vari kuzwanana, vari kuonekana, vari kudii, but impact inofanira kuwanika pagiraundi kune chimacitizen. Ndine ndichifunga kuti pavanosangana mukanzwa tine nyika dzakafanana nekuti DRC iri musadhaki ndizvozvo
Ndizvo
fanana nana South Africa. If you ask munhu ari kuenda kuDRC anokuudza kuti munhu auya munhu ari nani pane kudhiraivha uri muDRC. Wafamba nebasa uchienda imomo. Tikatarisa na South Africa havazeze kukuvadzana kana kuuraya dzimwe hama dzavo dzemuAfrica sekumaZimbabwe. Tinoita kunge tiri target yakakura kunana South Africa. Saka zvinhu zvezvazvichiti pamwe panosangana vakuru ava vanomboonesanawo kuti zvinombofamba sei, kuti tiri kuwirirana here kumusoro kumapurogiramu ari kuitwa zvinhu zviri kudai but vanhu vari pagiraundi ndo vanenge vachiitirwa zvese izvi kuti vabhenefiti. But ngangopa chimaexamples tichipiwa mukana kuti ukatarisa panyaya dzekufamba ukaenda paMozambique apo unotozwa munhu achitaura kuti polisi yemumozambique munoti muZimbabwe munonetsa munomwe muri wese. Ndatenda.
Aiwa, tinotenda chaizvo nekufona kwemaita muchivawo mindful of vamwe vari kuda kupinda pachirongwa contribution ine udzamu. Regai titore vamwe vateereri vaviri tisati ndadzoka kune vadare vangu vari muno 0772 162 Star FM, good evening.
Hello, maswera.
Taswera maswerawo.
Ndaswera zvangu. Inini hangu chandiri kuda kuti sadhaki iite ndechekuti isusu muSouth Africa tinoukama kwesadhaki, asi hama dzedu dzapera izvo zvingabva nhasi kunoviga mwana wangu Dzengo akafira kuSouth Africa achipondo ezvitone ndageni tine hama dzedu dzirikupodza kuSouth Africa. Ivo vatungamirira munangagona nevekune South Africa ngavambogara pasi vataure nenyaya hama dzedu idzo dzirikupodza. Ndatenda.
Aiwa, tinotenda chaizvo nekufona kwemaita. Regai nditore mumwe muteereri ndochidzoka kuvadare vangu 0772 162 651. Muri kungonzwa zvinhu zvinoenda paagenda here izvi, kana kuti zvine mumwe munyorerwo kana kuti mutaurirwo kamwe kachirungu, probably nyaya dzana xenophobia and the like. Star FM, good evening. Makasimba here? Aiwa, tinofara.
Zvikakuru kungotaura kuti mapositives kuti isusu taati machairmanship yesadhaki kwaona marodzero ari kugadzirwa zvakanaka, but tine zvinhu zvakawanda zvatinoda ikapeta ndenda kutofona kune vataura ava vanhu vachitaura zvekuSouth Africa kuti kwakatofa hama yavo but zvinoonda zvisina vanhu. Inini nyaya yandenge ndafonera nekuti isusu muno sekugara kwedu vanhu taakwanisiwa kuti izvova championship handi tinoiwanawo nerotational basis. Kana tikagara sei tingori isusu member yesadhaki pane patichasvika pekuti tinongonzi isusu taacheya wesadhaki. Saka isusu taakuudzwa manje patinenge tichigara tototyiridzirwa totoudzwa kuti tinofanira kunge tichikorokotedza tichitotyiswa kunzi tibvume kuti mwazvona here kuti isusu ndo tazvansi sadhaki yandatenda.
Tinotenda chaizvo. Ndofunga vadare vari munomo kuseka kwavari kuita isusu tinenge tichizovanzoda zvedu kutaura zvinenge zvine tinoda zvine umbowo zvinenge zvine zvinobatika. We would really like, it is prudent for us to really have our discussions based on facts, to have a factual discussions by every means possible. Asi manzwa zvataurwa ndochikupai mukana wekuti mupindure vadare vari munomo. Masimba, you've been quiet. Dr. Kaseki, you've been quiet.
I've been minding my own business. Was nyaya dzakutaurwa So I'm told I'm a politician who can do
asi pane ataura nyaya yekuti ku-DRC mafambiro and these are genuine concerns ndofunga tese tiri muno vatereri vari kufona tinofamba tichidini uchifamba tinozviona. These are lived experiences, Abigail.
Yes, definitely so. But even as I respond to that, I just want probably to clear this thing. I think isusu tingatoti makorokoto kuvana veZimbabwe mapiwa basa mapiwa chicharu chekuti mutaridze kuti munogona kutungamira SADC, and this means us all in our collective, just to clear maybe that. But then as we also go forward, I think these are issues that are coming up. The reason why SADC actually had to start in 1980 and still continue to this day, at one point in 1982 had to transform even better, it's because there are unresolved issues. There are new complex challenges that will be coming about. So because of that, the interesting thing which I continue to applaud in this era of the 44th SADC Summit is that we are hearing the people speaking out. What is now important is that to bring these voices together for actioning by member states. I want to believe that it was only probably the taking over of chairpersonship. Many following events are going to happen, pivot here in Zimbabwe, to make sure that things are going to be resolved. So for me, I think what is crucial is to activate all arms that matter, both at SADC and the national level, to make sure that these issues that are being brought forward, at least as we sum up the next year, as we sum up another round, probably 5 years, we must be able to say this has been resolved. But definitely challenges are there, but the reason why SADC hasn't actually reached closure is because those complex issues are still coming about. I want to believe that we have a responsibility, a collective responsibility as the citizens of SADC to resolve such.
Can I just tap in on something
yes.
regarding DRC? Trade between Zimbabwe and DRC has actually gone up, and I remember seeing numbers from about 30 million in 2018 to about almost 80, 90 million. So it goes back to what we were saying, that I appreciate what they say, that there's the reality that, you know, when trade is happening, drivers are affected. But there's also the other reality that's not being spoken about, that there's that inter-trade between Zimbabwe and DRC, which is actually increasing, which is the positive, which then us as Zimbabwe taking over the chairmanship need to also strengthen and address, to say we can break the $100 million barrier. Let's look at these things that are being raised by, for instance, your caller. So I think it's the reality that is lived, but also the information is not transcending enough to everyone to know that this is actually what's happening in the region.
All right, and tichitaura nyaya mineral resources, your view, Dr. Kaseke, not just the Zimbabwean economy, which is supposed to leverage on key pillars such as agriculture and mining, which anchor the economy. There has been question around us, and as has been raised even by the president during the public lecture and at the summit, around harnessing our minerals. There has been debate on what it is that should come first on minerals like chrome, gold and others, to impose an export ban on raw minerals, or first set up smelting plants, or allow people to export raw minerals while working on smelting plants. Your thoughts on that debate?
Thank you very much. Let me start with the coal. It's one of the minerals that we can maximize on. One you can use to even produce oil, diesel, petrol, ETs, like what South Africa is doing. They are also using to produce that. But because we don't have enough investment in terms of that area to maximize the potential use of what that mineral, that's the stumbling block that we are now having. You now realize that chrome, if I could ask those people who are in the war driving, how much is a pair of brakes that they are buying, and how much are we getting from exporting a ton of coal? If you could now check these things, they are almost close to one another, which means we are losing huge volumes in terms of production that we are now supposed to be doing in Zimbabwe. What we are now doing as Zimbabwe is that we are facilitating production in other countries at the expense of onward production in terms of value-added products. The main reason is because there is no proper funding in terms of some of these industries. The only solution that we can do with that is to try to have those companies which are producing in terms of those countries to come and settle in Zimbabwe. We give them favorable conditions, favorable investment conditions. They come, they value add, they beneficiate whatever the minerals that we are producing, and we are also able to export fully polished products, fully polished commodities outside there. At the moment, for us to impose a ban in terms of export of gold, in terms of export of mineral, we will not benefit as much because we don't have the industries which are supposed to further process these minerals for us to actually benefit more. So, as long as we don't have enough funding, as long as we don't have enough industrialization that is supposed to benefit these minerals, it will not make sense for us to impose a ban. We would rather continue having a bit in terms of foreign currency from the export of the raw materials and also benefit the economy using those export receipts that we are going to get.
Right.
Linda, sorry, if you don't mind if I piggyback what he says, so people don't say
just briefly
quickly,
yeah,
so that people don't say that the doctor is just saying theory. Last year we were at Harare in China, and that's exactly what they said to us. You might have lithium, and we need lithium, but as long as you have that lithium in the ground, you can't force us to come and invest there unless you give us the right type of investment climate. That's exactly what they said, because they know that even if we mine it, we've got nowhere else to take it besides to go to that same market. So these are the things that we need to. The issue of funding is going to be very important where we are going.
All right, and Masimba, on the issue of infrastructure, the gaps in your view in Zimbabwe in terms of infrastructure development, and what opportunities and challenges are there as far as we then look at implementing the SADC infrastructure development agenda? Infrastructure development is one of the key pillars in the NDS1 and even in the NDS2. It's one of the key thematic areas of SADC itself, its infrastructure development as a vehicle also for promoting regional integration. Infrastructure funding, what do you think are the gaps or the opportunities there?
So in my view, and very short, we need to make energy cheaper. We need to make the funding climate accessible, and I think we now have reached a stage where we need to privatize certain things. We need to privatize water. We need to privatize energy. We need to privatize rail. Let's make it competitive. As long as it's competitive and in private hands, those infrastructure gaps you're talking about will be able to fund funding. And you will see some of the projects that are happening, your Manizes, they will find project funding as long as that is there. And I think for us to close that gap, we need to let go of certain things as Zimbabwe, as a region, put it into private hands. It eventually has to benefit the citizen, and that's what will happen.
All right, and we must end the show. Briefly, Masimba, you've already spoken. Abigail, your parting remarks.
Well, my parting remarks, it probably will open up another session as we go forward. I'm not an economist, but I'm still asking myself a big question. What is funding if it is not gold? Because we are saying we lack funding. What is funding if it is not copper? What is funding if not all these vast resources that we have? Probably we will need to revisit the issue of destructuring, less competition among and within ourselves as African countries. But all the same, we have all a collective responsibility as a citizen of SADC to do something, to bring our minds on the table and find solutions out of the problems that may be bedeviling us. Thank you.
Dr. Kasege?
Thank you very much. I think I want to part ways with maybe giving advice to our presidents and those who implement policies. For example, the issue to do with us African SADC people hating each other and killing each other. It's supposed to come and end. Look in terms of developed countries, they don't hate each other like that, like how we actually hate. This is actually what is affecting development in terms of the Southern African development community. Then secondly, I think as a SADC countries, let's look in terms of what we can produce competitively and concentrate in terms of that and avoid us competing in terms of what can be produced by another. If you look in terms of the mandates that were there in the beginning in the formulation of SADC, where countries were being given different mandates. It was actually a good opportunity to look in terms of which country can do this better, and we can maximize and we can also ride on that. I think let's follow those principles and policies in SADC.
Leopold?
Or I'd say, it's still work in progress. There's a lot that has been done, and there's a lot that still needs to be done to realize regional integration. They have done remarkably well in terms of peace and security. Our region is relatively peace than any other region in the African continent. And in terms of environmental management, I think we have done remarkably well. In terms of establishing transfrontier conservation areas, we have done remarkably well. That's why you'd see that our region has the highest number of wild animals. And in terms of trade, of course, we're still lagging behind, but there is progress. I was listening as well to the executive secretary when he was saying that we need to list 10 top exports and 10 top imports, and then we find ways of trying to establish their access to the market so that we can promote regional trade. And also, let's encourage ourselves to consume what we produce here in Africa, in SADC region. If Swaziland produces sugar, let's consume that sugar in SADC. If Zimbabwe does this, let's do it together. And
an interesting contribution that has come through from former editor of the Sunday Mail, which says chairmanship is not specifically rotational. Sir Masire was chair for about 9 years straight. If I'm not mistaken, that's from 1980 to 1989. Mandela was chair for 3 years straight or so. And next year, for the first time, one of the island member states, Madagascar, is going to chair for the very first time ever in 45 years. So thank you very much, Mabasa Sasa, for that contribution. And to my guests, thank you very much for coming through. Masimba, our infrastructure expert, Abigail Mpambi, and Dr. Leopold Shakanyuka, our political analyst, as well as Dr. Nyasha Kaseki, our economist. And many thanks to all the listeners that came through via WhatsApp and the studio phone number. You can continue. Let's continue the interaction and engagement. I am Linda Muriro across all social media platforms. Let's continue the conversations. And many thanks to my producers, Tanyara Zgokutaura and Norman Muchema. I am Linda Muriro. Until next time, it is goodbye for now.
You've been listening to Muriro on Monday. Join us again next time on Star FM.
This is Zimbabwe's radio broadcasting
Mike, I guess not Zika, but anyway, it's okay.
News will secure the top stories.
That's one that's Zikisa and this one is okay. You're saying it, Taji?
No,
but
that's a quick Google search. That's a quick Google. When he sent me the,
I know it was not.
Political analysts have expressed optimism that President Emerson Mnangagwa's leadership could benefit the Southern African Development Community SADC.
Oh, okay.
During the recent SADC Summit in Mount Hampden, Mashonaland West Province, President Mnangagwa assumed the chairmanship of the regional bloc. In interviews with Zim Papers Radio News, political analysts Dr. Leopold Chakanyuka, Godwin Mathiwa, and Lazarus South praised the development, saying President Mnangagwa's leadership aligns with Zimbabwe's developmental agenda, which will feed into the region's growth.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Massimo, for opening the room. How did you see the program, guys? Mr. V, please pass my apologies to the head of news and the head of programming.
That apology tells you how it is.
Sorry.
That apology, let's give the presentation of how that.
My apologies, please extend my apologies to the head of programming. Please don't report me to the head of news.
Leadership by His Excellency is going to trigger not only infrastructure but regional integration as well as economic.
What's our first song?
Capitalize on the potential.
What's our first song?
The country was steadily successful SADC for 44 years of state and government summit, which saw President Mnangagwa taking over the chairmanship from his Lorenzo.
It's Everton Mlalazi.
And foster business connections continue with Vice President Dr. Constantino Chiwenga.
Don't up a Jordan.
The 19th Africa Conclave, which begins tomorrow. The event aims to bolster India Africa Partnerships. Our correspondent Mukudze
awuna kuya nema-guest naye we-charity.
Someone here, someone there.
Sorry?